How Water Quality Affects Moonshine. Moonshine Life Group. By J.B. Wagonmaker. Water is one of the most essential ingredients in making moonshine, as it affects the flavor, aroma, and alcohol content of the final product. However, not all water sources are created equal, and using the wrong type of water can ruin your final product. The role of water in moonshine. Water plays several roles in the moonshine making process, such as diluting the mash. Water is used to dilute the corn, sugar, and yeast mixture, also known as the mash, to create the right consistency and gravity for fermentation. The water quality can affect the pH, mineral content, and flavor of the mash, which in turn can affect the yeast activity and the conversion of sugars into alcohol. Cooling the vapor. Water is also used to cool down the vapor that is produced by heating the mash in the still. The vapor condenses into liquid alcohol, which is then collected as moonshine. The water quality can affect the temperature and purity of the condenser, which can affect the alcohol content and the quality of the moonshine. Cutting the moonshine. Water is also used to cut or dilute the moonshine after distillation, to reduce the alcohol content and make it more drinkable. The water quality can affect the taste, smell, and clarity of the moonshine, as well as its shelf life and stability. The types of water for moonshine. There are different types of water sources that can be used for making moonshine, such as tap water. Tap water is the most convenient and accessible water source, but it is also the least desirable for making moonshine. Tap water contains various chemicals, such as chlorine, chloramine, fluoride, and metals, that can alter the flavor and aroma of the moonshine and also inhibit the yeast growth and fermentation. Tap water can also contain bacteria and contaminants that can spoil the moonshine or cause health issues. Therefore, tap water should be avoided or filtered with a good RV filter before using it for moonshine. It will take out 99% of everything. Spring water. Spring water is a natural water source that comes from underground aquifers. Spring water is usually rich in minerals, such as calcium, magnesium, and iron, that can enhance the flavor and complexity of the moonshine. However, spring water can also vary in quality and consistency, depending on the location and season. Spring water can also contain impurities, such as sulfur, nitrates, and arsenic, that can affect the moonshine negatively. Therefore, spring water should be tested and treated before using it for moonshine. Distilled water. Distilled water is a purified water source that is obtained by boiling and condensing water. Distilled water is free of any chemicals, minerals, or contaminants and has a neutral pH and taste. Distilled water is ideal for making moonshine, as it does not interfere with the flavor, aroma, or alcohol content of the moonshine. Distilled water is also safe and consistent and can be easily obtained from stores or made at home. Therefore, distilled water is the preferred and recommended water source for making moonshine. The tips for using water for moonshine. Here are some tips for using water for moonshine. Use distilled water for diluting the mash, cooling the vapor, and cutting the moonshine, as it will give you the best quality and control over your moonshine. If you use spring water, make sure to test it for pH, hardness, and contaminants, and treat it accordingly. You can use spring water for diluting the mash and cutting the moonshine, but avoid using it for cooling the vapor, as it can cause scaling and corrosion in the condenser. If you use tap water, make sure to filter it or boil it to remove the chlorine and other chemicals. You can use tap water for cooling the vapor, but avoid using it for diluting the mash and cutting the moonshine, as it can affect the flavor and aroma of the moonshine. Use cold water for cooling the vapor, as it will increase the efficiency and speed of the condensation. You can use ice or a water pump to keep the water cold and circulating. Use warm water for diluting the mash, as it will help dissolve the sugar and activate the yeast. You can use a thermometer to check the temperature of the water and aim for around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Use room temperature water for cutting the moonshine, as it will prevent the moonshine from clouding or separating. You can use a hydrometer to measure the alcohol content of the moonshine and aim for around 40% ABV. Water is a vital ingredient in making moonshine, and using the right type and quality of water can make a big difference in the outcome of your moonshine. Distilled water is the best water source for making moonshine, as it will give you the most pure and consistent moonshine. Spring water can also be used, but it should be tested and treated before using it. By following these tips, you can ensure that your water quality is optimal for making moonshine and enjoy a smooth and flavorful moonshine. Cheers! Moonshine Life Recipes.